Hello and welcome to Ingaland. This is Frank and Kaylin, and today we're going to continue our series on the old Fords of Ingaland. Today's episode is going to feature the 29 Woody. So let me pull up ahead and get out of the way here and we'll take a look. Here's how we start the Woody. Got to retard the spark, give it a little gas, make sure the clutch is in, put it in neutral, make sure the gas valve is on, turn the key on, pull the choke out, and hit the starter. She starts, pull the spark lever back down, and we're ready to go. So this is the story of the 29 Model A Woody and how it came to be. And the story of this car actually goes all the way back to my very first Model A. And when I was a kid, even before I was a teenager, I was constantly bugging my dad and nagging him to get a Model A, and he wanted to get a Model A so bad. And finally, he had an acquaintance in town that had a 29 closed cab pickup. And he would come over once in a while and we'd visit, and he'd have the Model A, and we'd go and visit him once in a while. And I always oohed and awed over this Model A and always told the guy how much I wanted to have a Model A. And so he finally agreed to sell this Model A for $250. And I was 13 years old. At the time it would have been about 1966. And my dad told me that if I could save half of that money, that he would pitch in the other half. And of course he was planning on using it for a daily driver, which he did, but I was going to get to call it my car. And so for that whole summer I mowed lawns every day for like $2 and $2.50 a lawn, and sometimes they were big lawns. And so by the end of the summer I had enough money saved up so that we could go buy this Model A, and we went and bought the Model A, and we had it all through my high school years. And when I was a senior in high school, we got offered $1,200 for it, and that was big money in the our Model A world for a Model A. And so we sold it, and then we took the money, and Dad and I built a real nice 30 Roadster that I had when I was a senior in high school, and needless to say I had a lot of fun in that car. So we eventually sold that Model A too. And so fast forward about 25 years, and my parents lived just a few miles from here at Ingaland, and my mother was an antique dealer, and she would occasionally do big bulk trades with other antique dealers from other parts of the country. And she knew a guy that had a 29, well, they were working on a trade anyway, but this guy dealt in old cars too. Anyway, to swing this trade, he said that he had a 29 Model A pickup that he would throw in on the deal. And so my mother, without knowing anything about Model A's, sight unseen agreed to take this Model A as part of the trade, knowing that I would probably like having that first model of Model A that I had when I was young. Anyway, and it was a wonderful gesture on her part, but anyway, I went home one day and she was all excited, and she says, "Oh, wait till you see what I got." And so she took me up to her antique shop, and here was this 29 Model A pickup, and it was the most cobbled together, worst worn out piece of junk I had ever seen in my life. And when I was a kid in the 60s and the 70s hunting for Model A's, I wouldn't have dragged this Model A home for free. It was totally wore out. It had a Model T box on it. The doors didn't match. They looked the same on the outside, but on the inside they were different. So one was obviously from an older model, or a late model Model T. It had the wrong hood on it. It had a hood from a town sedan. And then it had these aftermarket headlights, which was the one thing that I really liked about the thing. Anyway, it was completely, totally worn out. So I acted happy and surprised. I didn't want to disappoint my mother, and I brought it home here to Ingaland. And I got it running and drove it around the farm here for a little while. And it had the death wobble at every speed. The front end was completely, every component on it was worn out. The brakes were totally shot. The block, the Model A engine block, had a hole in the front underneath the water pump that somebody had goobed up with JB Weld. Anyway, I was sitting here one day right in front of the barn here staring at it, wondering, what am I going to do with this piece of junk? It's not worth restoring. It's not hot rod material. It's not good enough to make into a driver. And I was just baffled as to, what am I going to do with it? Anyway, at that moment, I had just kind of an epiphany, and out of the blue came this idea that ever since I was a kid, I'd wanted to have a Model A Woody. And I knew that I'd never be able to afford a Model A Woody. And so as I was staring at this thing, I thought this would be the perfect candidate for a Model A Woody. I could tear off the back of the cab, the doors, the box, and just start to make a Woody body. And so I impulsively grabbed a cut-off wheel and a grinder and went at it. And in an hour and a half, I had it stripped down to just the frame and from here back. And I didn't have any plans for building a Woody, and I didn't draw anything out first. And so what I did was I just took a tape measure and I looked at a picture of a Woody, and I thought, well, it looks like it's sticking out about this far in the back. And then I thought, well, it's got to be about this wide for the fenders to come up off the running boards. So I just made a metal 2x2 heavy wall subframe and put a sheet of cabinet grade like birch plywood on there, and then just started making the body parts. Every weekend I would make, just a few parts. And it finally got to where it is here. And I remember as I was doing this, I spent less than $500 on wood for the whole thing. So when it got time to do the back seats, after I got most of the body done, I went to 7th Avenue Auto Salvage in Fargo, and the city had just junked out a bunch of Mercedes-Benz buses. And they weren't the big buses, they were smaller half-size buses, but they were plumb full of these seats. And so I got each one for $15 a piece, and I was so happy that they're just perfect. They're a thin profile and they don't take up a lot of room, so I love the back seats. And then another feature that I like is this plaque that belonged to my father-in-law, and he had a home office, and he collected knickknacks and stuff, and he had this in his home office and on the wall. And I always thought how fun it would be to have this in the Woody, and I used to tell him that. Well, anyway, after he passed away, he had left it to me, so I got to put that in. And one of the other things I did as I was making the body, I thought that because it's a Woody, it should have a wooden dash, and I had some walnut left over from a project, so I made a wooden walnut dash, and then I capped the edges all in walnut just to give it that kind of wood look. And one of the other things I get quite a few comments on is the radiator cap, and because we have kind of a fishing theme here at Ingaland, I thought it fitting that we have a fish radiator cap, and I got that about 30 years out of the J.C. Whitney catalog for like $15. But as I did the body, I also did the mechanical part of it. And the whole time that I did this build, this car was never out of commission for more than 2 weeks. I drove it and used it the whole time that I was building it. And so one of the first things I did was rebuild the front end, and that took like 2 weeks. And I remember spending about $500 on parts for that, and I had to have some machining done. But after that, I did the brakes, and I did the front 2 one weekend and the back 2, and that was like $100 a wheel, I think I remember. And then I found a guy, well, I knew a guy that locally was an engine rebuilder, and he was retiring and going out of business and selling all his engine rebuilding equipment, and he had one Model A motor left over that he'd rebuilt for a guy, and the guy never came and got it, so he said he'd sell me this engine for $1,500. So I was able to buy a new engine, and on one Saturday I had the old one out and the new one in, and was driving it around in the afternoon. And the other thing I'd like to talk about is that this is really a very much working Model A. This isn't a really going to town Model A. This Model A works every weekend, and because it has a trailer and a trailer hitch, we use it for hauling firewood and collecting brush. And then I occasionally have to drag the driveway with a spring tooth drag, and I use it for that. It works perfect for that. But I'd like to talk about the box too. The box is the one that came on the pickup when I got it, and it's not a Model A box, it's a Model T box. But I always wanted a little Model A trailer, and we use this thing all the time. It comes in really handy. But anyway, my dad and I decided to make a little trailer out of it, and right before I made the trailer, I got offered $500 for this box, and I almost sold it, but in the long run I'm glad I didn't. But so the Model A has a lot of sentimental value to me, because I had a lot of Model A's in my life, and this Model A started out as probably the most worn out, least desirable of any Model A I ever came across. And in the long run, it's wound up to be the one that I'm most fond of, and it's most dearest to my heart. And of course, it reminds me of my mother, because it came from her. So in some ways, it's kind of like my mother, the car. And then most of the mechanical aspects of it, my father helped me on. So I have all kinds of memories of struggling with rusty bolts and ill-fitting parts and stuff with my father to get it to run. But so that's about it. That's the story of the Model A Woody, and we have one more episode left, and I think we've saved the best for last. So stay tuned for our final episode of the Old Fords of Ingaland. And so for now, this is Frank and Kaylin saying we'll see you in the next episode.